Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you, like us, spend your time looking at these huge headlines, billions of records stolen, and trying to figure out what that actually means for the real world, then you're in the right place. Because 2025, it wasn't just another bad year for cybersecurity. The sources we've been digging into show it was a fundamental watershed moment. It was the year the industry was forced to completely redefine what a true cyber catastrophe even looks like.
That's absolutely right. For decades, the metric was so simple, right? It was just volume. That's what drove the headlines.
The biggest number wins?
Exactly. It was all about the input. Millions of records here, billions of gigabytes there. A simple numbers game. But as we're about to dissect with the big attacks of 2025, those gigantic numbers, while they are alarming, they often completely masked the true tangible harm.
The outcome.
The outcome, the actual measurable results. We're talking about human life, massive operational paralysis, and serious economic collapse.
So our mission today, and we're guided by some of the best analysis out there, is to move beyond those sensational record counts. We're looking at a complete rethink of risk examining the real-world harm, the cascading supply chain effects, and what new metrics the security community, and maybe more importantly, policymakers, are starting to demand.
Right.
And our entire analysis today is sourced from one incredibly comprehensive and, frankly, pretty eye-opening document. It's the Beyond the Numbers, the 2025 Data Breach Landscape Report, published by the experts at CISO Marketplace. We've pulled the most crucial and terrifying findings from that report to give you the clearest picture of why 2025 was the year the metric for catastrophe finally had to shift.
And I think to understand that shift, you really have to start where everyone used to focus. You have to start with the sheer, almost dizzying scale of data volume. We have to look at the traditional view first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even by that old standard, the scale of the top 10 breaches in 2025 was, well, the report just calls it unprecedented.
Yeah.
We saw data exposure from fintech, from e-commerce government systems. But leading the pack, just dwarfing everything else in sheer volume, was what the report identifies as the Chinese surveillance megaleak.
We're talking about 4 billion records. You have to stop and really think about that number for a second. This wasn't some scrape of a small user list or one badly configured app.
No.
This was the exposure of a 631 gigabyte database, and it was just sitting on a completely unprotected internet-facing server. Not even a basic password was needed to get in.
Just open to the world.
Just open. Researchers, they immediately characterize it as the single largest source leak of Chinese personal data ever publicly identified.
And when you start digging into what was in that data, it moves from just being big to being genuinely chilling. This wasn't just names and emails, was it?
Not at all. The source is very clear on this. This was a meticulously assembled dossier. It was designed for broad, deep profiling. The analysis breaks it down, and the specifics are, well, they're staggering. First, over 805 million WeChat records.
Okay, so that's unique IDs, metadata, and the analysts suspect it's probably communication logs too, right?
They strongly suspect it, yes. Then you have 780 million precise residential addresses with geographic identifiers, so that doesn't just tell you someone's city.
It puts a pin on a map.
It puts a pin on their house, it maps their daily life, and then you combine that with vehicle registrations, utility data, even pension funds that were also found in the file. You start to realize the level of state or maybe commercial interest this data supported.
But I think the financial piece is maybe the most worrying part, especially on a global scale.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about over 630 million records with classic financial PII, so payment card numbers, dates of birth, full names, phone numbers, and then a staggering 300 million Alipay card and token records were found.
And why is that specific token data so critical? What does that unlock?
Well, because the researchers, they characterized this entire massive data set not as some kind of accidental data sprawl, the kind of mess companies often make.
Right, not just a messy database.
No, they called it a centralized aggregation point. The variety, the depth, the organized structure of the data. It all strongly implies this was designed for sophisticated continuous surveillance, for deep profiling, or for large-scale data enrichment that was meant to be sold or used internally.
So if it's a centralized aggregation point, not an accident?
Yeah.
What are the real-world risks here? We're not just talking about someone stealing my credit card number to buy something online, are we?
No, not at all. The risk here is enabling these incredibly sophisticated high-confidence attacks. Imagine state actors or these massively well-resourced criminal groups having the foundation to build comprehensive behavioral, economic, and social profiles on millions of citizens.
It's the starting block for anything they want to do.
It's the ultimate starting block. This database is the foundation for large-scale, highly customized phishing campaigns, where the attackers already know your address, your pension provider, and your social network activity.
They know who to impersonate.
They know exactly who to impersonate to gain your trust. This data enables high-confidence blackmail operations. It enables extremely targeted state-sponsored intelligence gathering or even disinformation campaigns. The database was taken down really quickly after it was discovered, which, it prevented any firm attribution. But the sophistication, it points toward either state-level actors or the absolute highest tier of criminal enterprise. It's a foundational risk that might not even show itself for years, but the sheer size makes it an extreme societal threat.
Okay, so let's pivot now. We've talked about pure volume.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a breach where the sensitivity of the data and the vulnerability of the people affected really drove the impact. I'm talking about the PowerSchool breach from January 2025. This wasn't 4 billion records. This was 72 million specifically, 62 million students, and 9.5 million educators. And for anyone who doesn't know, PowerSchool serves a huge slice of the North American K-12 education market.
It's about 75%. It's massive.
So the exposure was enormous in scope and just deeply personal.
And this is exactly where we start to see the limits of just counting records. The data stolen here was sensitive in a way that exposed these long-term, irreversible personal vulnerabilities. The investigation confirmed the theft of special education status data.
So things like IEPs.
IEPs, individualized education programs, 504 designations, plus mental health records, therapy notes, disciplinary reports, and even extremely sensitive documents like parental restraining orders or custody arrangements.
You're describing the kind of records that are protected for a reason. I mean, the harm from exposure is immense.
It's immense, and it's permanent. They also grabbed medical alerts, anxiety disorder diagnoses, medications that students were taking, and critically, the report states that Social Security numbers were exposed for about 25% of the affected students.
Millions of kids.
Millions of minors. And the real tragedy here, the part that's so frustrating, is that the root cause was a failure of the most basic security measure imaginable.
Don't tell me.
The initial access came through compromised employee credentials on the PowerSchool customer support portal, a site called PowerSource. And the key failure, a complete and total absence of multi-factor authentication, no MFA.
That is just maddening.
Yeah.
A lack of MFA on a critical external-facing portal led to the exposure of millions of children's most sensitive data. Did they at least catch it quickly?
Unfortunately, no. The report is clear. The attackers had 9 full days of undetected access to these systems.
9 days.
9 days. Before anyone at PowerSchool even knew there was an intrusion. They only found out about the breach when the attacker contacted them to demand a ransom.
So they were told by the criminals.
They were told by the criminals. Forensic analysis by firms like CrowdStrike later confirmed just systematic failures in fundamental security controls that went way beyond the MFA issue. And while PowerSchool did end up paying the ransom, the core issue remains. And it's what the report calls the children's data problem.
Let's really elaborate on that, because for anyone listening, this is a unique and really insidious type of long-term harm. It's not something most adults face in the same way.
Right. So when an adult's Social Security number is stolen, they can, in theory, lock their credit, monitor their reports, get alerts. But minors don't have credit reports to monitor.
There's nothing to check?
There's nothing to check. So identity theft that targets them often goes completely unnoticed for years, sometimes 10, even 15 years. The fraud only surfaces much, much later. Typically when the victim is, say, applying for their first student loan or trying to rent an apartment or getting their first real job.
And they get rejected and have no idea why.
Exactly. Only to discover their financial identity has been completely compromised since they were in elementary school. The fraudsters have had a decade or more to build up credit lines, accrue massive debt, or file fraudulent tax returns using these pristine, unused Social Security numbers. This one breach set off a massive, long-term, ticking time bomb of identity fraud for millions of young people who have zero visibility into the damage until it is far, far too late. It's a catastrophic societal impact that won't show up on a balance sheet today.
And speaking of delayed detection, that brings us to South Korea. Specifically SK Telecom, the country's largest mobile carrier. They discovered in April 2025 that their systems have been compromised since June of 2022.
Almost 3 years.
Nearly 3 years of undetected compromise. This exposed details for about 27 million subscribers, which is basically their entire customer base.
The duration of that breach, 34 months, is just horrifying on its own. But it's the technical mechanism that makes this incident really stand out. The attackers used these very sophisticated variants of malware called BPF-DOR across at least 28 critical servers.
Okay, we should probably pause and unpack BPF Door for a minute. Why is it considered so stealthy and so dangerous?
BPF Door is it's a master of disguise. It exploits something called the Berkeley Packet Filter, or BPF. Now, this is a legitimate feature in Linux systems. It's designed to help network tools efficiently capture specific types of traffic. It's a good thing, normally.
So it's using a built-in tool against the system itself.
That's a perfect way to put it. The attackers leverage BPF to essentially create a secret, nearly invisible communication channel that just bypasses traditional firewalls and intrusion detection systems. Imagine you have a security guard watching the front door, but BPF Door is using a legal, pre-approved maintenance tunnel that the guard is programmed to ignore completely.
It's hiding in plain sight.
Perfectly, and that allows the threat actor to maintain this persistent, invisible presence inside the network for, in this case, almost 3 years without anyone noticing.
So using this invisible method, what was the core data they were after? What did they steal from 27 million people?
They got everything. 26.95 million international mobile subscriber identity records. That's the IMSI, along with IMEI hardware records, network usage data, and crucially, the authentication keys. These are known as the key values.
Key value. Okay, that sounds incredibly technical. Can you break that down in simple terms?
Yeah.
Why is stealing a key value such a fundamental security disaster?
Think of your SIM card's key value as its digital DNA, or its secret master key. It's a 128-bit key that is hard-coded onto the physical SIM card, and it's only supposed to be known by the mobile carrier's network to authenticate your device.
So it's the trust anchor.
It's the ultimate trust anchor. Every time your phone connects to the network, your phone and the carrier exchange these encrypted messages that are based on this secret key. If a threat actor steals that key value, they can replicate or clone your physical SIM card.
And if they clone your SIM, they basically become you digitally.
Precisely. The exposure of these keys, and this is critical, the report confirmed they were being stored unencrypted on the compromised servers. That's just an unacceptable systemic failure. With a cloned SIM, attackers can intercept your text messages,
Which means they can intercept 2FA codes.
which today are commonly used for two-factor authentication on your bank accounts, your crypto wallets, your social media. They can reset your passwords, take over your entire digital identity, and commit high-value fraud.
This sounds like a massive regulatory failure, given the risk to their entire subscriber base.
Yeah.
How did the Korean authorities respond?
The Korean Personal Information Protection Commission, they came down hard. They fined SK Telecom about $97 million, and they cited this whole litany of systematic failures that went way beyond just the BPF Door compromise.
So it wasn't just the hack itself.
No, it was the environment that allowed it. They highlighted the lack of basic access controls between the internet-facing systems and the core internal systems. They highlighted the storage of 26 million unencrypted authentication keys. And there was a critical violation of regulatory timelines because they delayed the breach notification way past the mandatory 24-hour legal requirement.
Oh.
The carrier CEO had to publicly acknowledge the gravity of it. He called it the company's worst hacking case in telecom history.
That $97 million fine, it shows some regulatory teeth, but it's still just a fraction of the potential long-term damage from 3 years of invisible compromise. Okay, our final example in this data-centric view brings us to the supply chain and to infrastructure. Oracle Cloud.
Right.
In March of 2025, a threat actor claimed to have exfiltrated 6 million records from Oracle Cloud single sign-on and LDIP systems. This could have potentially affected over 140,000 enterprise tenants.
This one was particularly alarming because it targets that foundational security layer. Now, Oracle, they initially denied the claim, but independent security researchers at a firm called CloudSecure, they verified it. The compromised endpoint was a legitimate production SSO system, and the sample data the attacker provided was confirmed as valid by multiple affected companies.
So it was real.
It was real, and the failure here, yet again, was profound, it was systemic, and it was entirely preventable.
The vulnerability was listed as CVE 2021-35587. That's a known flaw, isn't it?
Oh, it's very well known. It's a critical vulnerability in Oracle Access Manager that was known since 2021, and it was added to CISA's official known exploited vulnerabilities catalog all the way back in December of 2022.
So it should have been patched years ago.
Immediately. It should have been an emergency patch. Yet the affected server was still running Oracle Fusion Middleware 11G software.
And for those listening who aren't deep in IT infrastructure, why is that specific version, 11G, so relevant here?
That version dates back to 2014. We're talking about functionally ancient, unsupported software being used to secure the single sign-on system for tens of thousands of major global corporations. It's the equivalent of running your entire corporate security system on Windows XP in 2025. It just shows this deep institutional failure to retire legacy infrastructure that should have been decommissioned years ago.
And the data they got wasn't just customer names. It was basically the keys to the kingdom for potentially 140,000 corporate clients. We're talking encrypted SSO and LDAP credentials and sensitive Java key store files or JKS files.
And this is exactly why security researchers immediately started calling this 2025's SolarWinds moment. This wasn't an attack on an end user, it was an attack on the foundational identity layer that dictates who can access what across countless interconnected enterprises. To define JKS simply, these files hold the private keys and digital certificates that are used to authenticate and encrypt traffic for major enterprise applications.
So if an attacker gets those keys.
If an attacker gets these keys, they can potentially forge identities, decrypt internal communications, and execute what's called lateral movement across all of these interconnected enterprise systems.
So even if I, as a listener, I'm not an Oracle Cloud client directly,
Yeah.
my bank is, or my hospital, or my supplier, I'm potentially exposed.
That's exactly it. It affects organizations far, far beyond Oracle's direct customer base because companies, they mistakenly assume that identity security at this deep infrastructure level is solely the cloud provider's problem. It's a systemic identity crisis that was caused by neglecting a 3-year-old patch.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. We've just reviewed breaches involving billions of records, 3 years of undetected compromise with sophisticated malware like BPF-DOR, and failures to patch vulnerabilities that are years old, which, in the Oracle case, risk this massive supply chain cascade. The scale and the stealth of these threats are just constantly evolving. And to track this level of complexity, to analyze those stealthy attack vectors, and to identify those critical exposures like the lack of NFA at PowerSchool, the security community has to rely on cutting-edge intelligence.
It's essential.
Which is why we want to thank our sponsor, www.breached.company, a vital resource for threat monitoring and real-time intelligence gathering. And of course, we thank www.cisomarketplace.com, which published the incredible analysis we're diving into today, providing the essential risk framework that we are just about to get into.
Right, because we've established that the traditional metrics, the volume counts, they give you the scale of the input. They tell you how much data was compromised, but they fundamentally, and I'd say catastrophically, fail to capture the scale of the outcome.
This is the core problem the CISO Marketplace report is trying to solve. They force us to contrast inputs versus outcomes. And their example is perfect. A breach exposes 1 million emails. What's the harm? Minimal, maybe some light phishing.
Annoying, but not life-altering.
Right, versus a breach that exposes just 1,000 medical records, but those records detail HIV status or an active cancer diagnosis. The harm there is significant, it's targeted, it's life-altering for those 1,000 people.
And the traditional model, it really struggles to tell the difference between those two scenarios. But then you have to consider the third scenario, a breach that disrupts hospital operations for weeks, even if zero data is stolen, which can lead directly to injury and death. The data-centric view completely misses this outcome, which is actually the most severe of all.
So this emerging framework that the report introduces, it measures the true toll by focusing on the outcome metrics that actually matter, the duration of operational disruption, the human impact, and that means physical injuries, deaths, psychological harm, and the broader economic damage, including market value destruction and those cascading effects down the supply chain.
This shift is so crucial. The most consequential attacks of 2025 proved that cybersecurity has fully evolved, its past being just an IT or a data privacy problem. The report argues, and I think very convincingly, that it is now undeniably an ESG issue, environmental, social, and governance, and an HSE issue, health, safety, and environment.
That's a huge conceptual jump for a lot of people. How does a digital breach translate into an HSE or an ESG failure?
Well, just look at the disruption. When an attack shuts down a major manufacturer like JLR, you have immediate environmental consequences. Hazardous waste processes can't be managed. You have massive social consequences. Tens of thousands of jobs are put at risk overnight. And you have clear governance failures, like using 4-year-old credentials or having no cyber insurance. These are physical, material risks that the old risk models, the ones that only looked at data theft, were never designed to capture. And that profound shift in perspective, that brings us to the most painful and revealing case studies of 2025. These are the cases that rank lowest on data volume, but highest on actual catastrophe.
Let's start with the most dramatic and really the most tragic example, the NHS Synovus attack. This did not involve billions of records. It exposed about 900,000 patient records. But it had a human cost that you cannot measure in a database column.
The timeline here is just critical. In June of 2024, the Russian ransomware group Quillin attacked Synovus. Now, Synovus is a major pathology services provider. They are essential for NHS hospitals all across Southeast London. The attack's true catastrophic toll, it unfolded over the next year. And it culminated in what was deemed the UK's first officially confirmed ransomware-related death in June of 2025.
A confirmed fatality directly attributed, at least in part, to a digital breach. That should be a siren call for every single executive and politician on the planet. What was the exact causal link that the investigation found?
The patient safety investigation, it confirmed that a patient died unexpectedly during this highly disruptive period of the attack. And the prominent contributing factor they identified was, and I'm quoting here, a long wait for a blood test result due to the cyberattack impacting pathology services.
So they just couldn't get the lab work done.
They couldn't get it done. The inability to process basic diagnostic tests in a timely manner led to critical delays in care that directly contributed to this patient's death. The CEO of Synovus had to publicly and very soberly acknowledge that tragedy.
This one incident, it immediately elevates the entire conversation from just data security to clinical patient safety. But the scale of the operational disruption, even setting aside that horrible fatality, it's just staggering.
Oh, absolutely. The investigation logged over 10,152 canceled outpatient appointments, 1,710 canceled time-sensitive surgeries.
Wow.
And there were approximately 600 specific patient safety incidents reported. That includes 2 confirmed cases of severe harm and over 120 cases of low to moderate harm, all caused by delayed diagnostics. And this was not a quick fix. This level of disruption went on for more than 6 months.
6 months. 6 months of operating in crisis mode for frontline healthcare workers. How deep did that chaos really go?
Deep. Because pathology services were crippled, blood supply shortages persisted for months. And that didn't just affect the immediate London trusts, but hospitals all across the country that relied on these networked services. Primary care practices, local doctors' offices, they lost access to essential diagnostic services. That means cancer diagnoses were delayed. And critically, emergency procedures sometimes had to be carried out without complete, up-to-date diagnostic information available to the surgeons and the anesthesiologists.
It just paints this picture of intense, dangerous pressure on the staff. The report notes that security experts, people like Bed, they didn't just call for better patching. They immediately started urging NHS leaders and members of parliament to launch a full public inquiry. Why an external inquiry and not just an internal review?
Because the risk is no longer theoretical, and it's not just financial, it's a clinical risk, and it's measured in lives. An internal review, it focuses on procedures. But a public inquiry that forces a fundamental systemic review of patient safety standards and security infrastructure at a national level. The Synovus case just unequivocally confirmed that inadequate cyber defenses are a deadly frontline failure. It makes healthcare a central domain for these new outcome-based metrics.
So the Synovus case shows the maximum human impact. To look at the maximum operational and cascading economic impact, we have to turn to the retail sector, specifically the Marks and Spencer incident.
M&S, it's a core pillar of the British retail economy, and it was brought to its knees in April 2025. Not by some head-on attack, but by a sophisticated supply chain hit from the ransomware group Scattered Spider. They didn't hit M&S directly. They targeted a third-party IT supplier that had privileged access into M&S systems.
And the attack chain itself, it highlights a weakness that exists in nearly every single organization, which is the human element of the help desk.
Precisely. Scattered Spider used these advanced social engineering techniques to manipulate the IT help desk staff at that third-party supplier. They tricked employees into resetting passwords for critical M&S accounts. This tactic, it leverages innocent insiders, staff members who, under stress or through sophisticated manipulation, they unknowingly just hand over the keys needed to deploy ransomware, encrypt systems, and steal data. It's a classic double extortion scheme.
So what was the result of that for the British public? What did they see?
They saw complete operational paralysis for a very significant period. The company was forced to shut down all online ordering for 46 consecutive days. This was not a temporary website blip.
And the financial toll of that has to be huge.
It was an estimated $300 million in lost operating profit, which represented a crushing 30% of their expected annual profits for the year. And on top of that, over $750 million was just wiped off their market capitalization as this incident dragged on and on.
And this is where that ESG framework you mentioned really clicks for a sector like retail, right? The
Yes.
digital attack had very physical, on-the-ground consequences.
Absolutely. In M&S's huge network of over 1,400 stores, because the automated stock systems were offline, food halls started running low on essential stock. Staff had to revert to manually tracking inventory with literal pen and paper.
Back to the Stone Age.
Totally. And crucially, they had to manually check refrigerator temperatures and log them without digital monitoring. That is a critical food safety risk. Gift card terminals, returns kiosks, loyalty services all offline for weeks. It caused massive customer frustration and really damaged brand trust.
I remember the CEO tried to call it a bump in the road, but the company's response suggests something much more serious. They announced they were condensing a 2-year technology transformation plan into this frantic 6-month sprint.
They recognized the catastrophic fragility that the incident exposed. And this, along with some simultaneous attacks on other major British retailers, it forced the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre to issue emergency guidance that was specifically focused on protecting IT help desk password reset procedures. The attackers knew the easiest path into that supply chain was through human manipulation.
If M&S was a demonstration of catastrophic retail disruption, then Jaguar Land Rover, JLR provided the ultimate, most painful case study in operational collapse and supply chain cascade. It earned the top spot in this new framework.
The Cyber Monitoring Center classified this attack as the most financially damaging cyber event in British history, full stop.
So let's just break down the sheer national scale of the JLR catastrophe. It struck on August 31st, 2025. What was the final total economic damage that the report calculated?
The total economic damage was calculated at an astronomical $1.9 billion. That's roughly $2.5 billion. Production at their UK facilities was completely shut down for over 5 weeks.
5 weeks.
5 weeks. That resulted in production losses exceeding $50 million per week. The financial number alone is enough to call it a catastrophe. But the cascade effect, that's the real story here.
Explain that supply chain cascade, because this is the core reason why the traditional data-centric view just completely fails to measure this.
Right. So JLR, it doesn't just employ 33,000 workers directly. It sits at the very apex of the UK's largest automotive supply chain. It supports an estimated 104,000 to 200,000 additional jobs across more than 5,000 dependent businesses.
And they run on a just-in-time manufacturing model.
Exactly, which means they rely on parts arriving just before they're needed. There's virtually no buffer inventory. So when JLR production just stopped for 5 weeks, those suppliers had nowhere to send their parts.
Which means immediate human shockwaves right across the country's industrial heartland.
Immediate. The report details the consequences. Smaller suppliers, whose businesses were maybe 80 or 90% dependent on JLR orders, they began laying off staff within days. One supplier confirmed laying off 40 people. That was nearly half its workforce almost immediately. The trade union Unite, they reported supply chain workers being told to apply for universal credit almost instantly because the cash flow just stopped dead.
Wow.
The shockwave was so severe, it was estimated to affect 0.5% of the UK's entire gross domestic product, GDP. This is a single cyber event translating directly into national economic instability.
And the severity was so extreme, it prompted this massive, unprecedented government intervention.
It did. The UK government had to back a £1.5 billion emergency loan to JLR. It was done via UK Export Finance, but it was essentially a corporate bailout. The report confirms this was the first time the UK government had ever provided direct financial support to a private company specifically because of a cyber attack.
What did the government say?
The business secretary called it not only an assault on an iconic British brand, but on our world-leading automotive sector and the men and women whose livelihoods depend on it. It was treated as a direct national security crisis.
If the economic impact wasn't enough, the forensic details of what happened before the catastrophic September attack, they reveal these profound governance failures. And it links right back to our earlier discussion about old vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. The main attack in September, it was preceded by a March 2025 data leak, where a group called Hellcat Ransomware published hundreds of gigabytes of internal JLR data. That initial access used credentials that were stolen in 2021,
4 years earlier.
4 years earlier, and they were still valid in 2025. This just shows a fundamental failure in credential lifecycle management that created the backdoors that were potentially exploited in the later catastrophic attack. They had years to rotate those keys, and they didn't.
And then there's the insurance gap, which
Okay.
exposed the company to the full financial burden.
That's the final critical lesson here. Reports indicate that JLR had no active cyber insurance that would cover the immense losses from the September attack. Now, unlike MNS, which expected to recover a lot of its $300 million loss through insurance, JLR had to bear the full $1.9 billion financial burden itself. And this is precisely why that government intervention, that unprecedented loan, became necessary. The financial risk was completely unmitigated. It was a catastrophic governance failure that just magnified the eventual loss.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting for me. When you look at the JLR loss, $1.9 billion, over 100,000 jobs threatened, and you realize that 4-year-old stolen credentials were a key factor, it becomes crystal clear that basic security hygiene MFA, timely patching, key rotation is now a matter of national economic security.
It absolutely is.
Organizations have to fully understand their supply chain vulnerabilities and, critically, their risk transfer mechanisms right now. This level of comprehensive risk management, from threat monitoring to strategic advice on insurance gaps, it requires expert insight and dedicated resources, which is why we want to thank our sponsors again, www.cisomarketplace.com and www.breach.company. They are essential resources helping CIOs and security leaders navigate these exact catastrophic scenarios and understand where the real threats are emerging.
So let's transition now to that new framework the CISO Marketplace report introduces. It really synthesizes this shift we've been talking about. The old model measured inputs, the number of records. The new model, it measures outcomes across 5 crucial dimensions. And that allows us to truly weigh the impact of incidents like JLR and Synovus against pure data volume.
Okay, the first dimension is the most critical and honestly the most shocking. Human safety impact. This includes fatalities, physical injuries, severe psychological harm, and the effect of delayed medical care. The NHS Synovus attack is the grim, definitive case study here.
The second dimension is operational disruption. This focuses heavily on the duration of service unavailability, 46 consecutive days for M&S. The percentage of operations affected, the recovery timeline, and the reliance on those manual workarounds. We saw M&S staff manually checking refrigerator temperatures. It's a perfect illustration of how digital failure translates into physical chaos.
Third is the pure economic impact. And this goes way beyond just direct costs like paying a ransom. It includes lost revenue and operating profit like the $300 million M&S lost. It includes market value destruction, insurance implications, and most importantly, those quantifiable GDP level effects, which JLR proved is now possible with its 0.5% shockwave.
Fourth, the supply chain cascade. This is the key mechanism that just amplified the JLR disaster. It measures the number of dependent businesses affected, the jobs put at risk or lost over 104,000, and the resulting disruption to downstream services and consumers.
And finally, number 5 is societal impact. And this addresses the effect on public services, national security, community disruption, and that long-term consumer harm. It covers everything from the 4 billion record Chinese leak to that identity fraud time bomb that's still ticking for the children in the Power School breach.
And when you apply this new comprehensive framework, the ranking of the 2025 incidents just shifts dramatically. It proves that record counts are entirely misleading. Under the old framework, the Chinese leak, with its 4 billion records, would have been number 1, hands down.
Easily.
But under the new impact framework, the rankings completely invert.
So Jaguar Land Rover is ranked #1. Even though the number of records stolen is listed as unknown, it scored extreme on economic impact, that $1.9 billion, and extreme on supply chain cascade for putting over 100,000 jobs at risk. The CISO Marketplace analysis decided this was the most significant consequence for the UK economy and its industrial base.
And NHS Synovus is ranked #2. With only 900,000 records exposed, it ranks extreme for human impact, 1 confirmed death, and extreme for societal impact because of the disruption of core public health services for 6 months. The immediate consequence to life ranked it above almost everything else.
M&S comes in at #3 with very high economic impact, the $300 million loss, and high supply chain and societal disruption because of those 46 days of chaos.
And the Chinese leak, the 4 billion record incident, it falls all the way to #4. Now, it still ranks extreme for societal impact because of the potential for surveillance and state intelligence, but because the immediate human casualties were zero, and the direct economic costs were unknown, and the supply chain cascade was low, the direct outcome severity was just less than the operational collapses that struck critical UK infrastructure. This dramatic ranking change, it's the central defining finding of the entire CISO Marketplace report.
So what does this all mean for you, for the person listening? Whether you're a business leader, a security professional, or just trying to understand this, the report outlines 4 absolutely critical lessons drawn directly from these catastrophes.
Lesson 1. Cyber risk is business risk. The JLR incident is the definitive, quantifiable proof of this. A cyber event can now threaten corporate survival. It generated losses that exceeded 50% of JLR's annual net profit. Security professionals have to stop talking about just CVE scores and start translating risk into the language of the boardroom. Market capitalization, revenue streams, corporate viability. If it affects the GDP, it affects your bottom line.
Lesson 2. Insurance is not optional. The fact that JLR lacked active cyber insurance required the unprecedented intervention of the UK government to prevent the collapse of an entire industrial supply chain. Organizations have to treat comprehensive cyber insurance as an essential, non-negotiable risk transfer mechanism now. That gap in coverage is exactly what exposed JLR to the full $1.9 billion burden.
Lesson 3. Third-party risk is first-party risk. This was the common, devastating thread across both M&S and JLR. Both were compromised via supply chain partners. In one case, by tricking a third-party help desk, in the other, by exploiting credentials stolen 4 years ago. The report just hammers this point home. The security posture of your entire ecosystem is inseparable from your own security posture. You have to manage your supplier's hygiene with the same scrutiny you apply to your own systems.
And finally, and maybe this is the most frustrating one, Lesson 4. Credential hygiene prevents catastrophe. This lesson points to a failure of the absolute fundamentals. JLR used credentials stolen in 2021. SK Telecom stored 26 million authentication keys unencrypted. PowerSchool lacked multi-factor authentication on a critical portal. Implementing and strictly enforcing these basic controls, MFA on everything, timely patching, regular key rotation, would have significantly limited or entirely prevented some of the most expensive and damaging breaches of 2025. It's not always about sophisticated BPF door malware. Sometimes it really is just about turning on MFA.
And beyond the corporate lessons, the report delivers some pretty stern implications for policymakers. They have to recognize this fundamental shift in risk. First, reporting requirements need immediate expansion. Regulators should mandate reporting of operational disruption duration, confirmed human harm, and specific supply chain effects, not just data exposure volumes. If a hospital or a critical manufacturer is shut down, that needs to be tracked and responded to with the same urgency as a national security threat.
Second, our definitions of critical infrastructure need updating right now. The JLR attack proved that major manufacturers, even if they don't provide power or water, they become national critical infrastructure based on their overwhelming economic and employment effects. A single company shut down affecting 0.5% of GDP that warrants infrastructure-level protections and government oversight. The line between corporate risk and national security, it just dissolved in 2025.
And finally, the NHS Synovus attack, which resulted in a confirmed death, it demands a systematic review at the highest levels. Security experts and the CISO Marketplace report agree. A full public inquiry into NHS cybersecurity and patient safety is warranted to prevent future human casualties. The stakes are simply too high for internal departmental reviews when clinical outcomes are on the line.
So what does this all mean? 2025 was the year cyber attacks became documented catastrophes. They moved from the theoretical to the tragically, visibly real. The breaches of the year proved that cybersecurity is no longer just an IT issue. It is a human safety issue, an economic stability issue, and a national security problem. The fact that an attack on a pathology lab caused a death and an attack on an automaker necessitated a multi-billion-pound government loan. It just proves the global risk landscape has permanently changed.
And the most painful takeaway from that JLR attack is the failure of that fundamental credential lifecycle management. That 4-year-old stolen credentials can still bring down a major global industry. It forces us all to look inward and ask, what other legacy credentials, what other unpatched 2014-era middleware like that Oracle 11G server is just lurking out there in critical infrastructure around the world, waiting for the next supply chain shockwave?
And crucially, what is the long-term societal impact going to be when those millions of children whose social security numbers and mental health records were stolen in the PowerSchool breach start applying for loans and jobs a decade from now? The outcomes of 2025 are going to be felt for years, long after these initial headlines have faded.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this analysis gives you the crucial context you need to navigate this new risk-based world of cybersecurity.
And we want to give a final thank you to our sponsors, www.breach.company and www.cisomarketplace.com, for supporting the critical research and analysis that drives essential reports like the one we discussed today. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay secure.